Great. So following this webinar, we will be sure to upload this on our NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube channel if it's something you want to go back to or share following this recording. But welcome and thank you all for joining us. For today's time, we just ask that everybody remain on mute to prevent and avoid background noises throughout the presentation, but feel free to utilize the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout. And then there will be time at the end for some Q&A as well. And following the webinar, I will send out an email to everybody with the slides and also a reminder to complete the evaluation. For anyone attending today, this webinar is eligible for one CEU for counselors, social workers, and marriage and family therapists. So at the end of the presentation, I will share a link in the chat to complete an evaluation. We would love everybody's feedback. It helps us to plan for future webinars and to check in how we're doing. But particularly if you're looking to get that CEU, you'll want to provide your name and email address and your license with license number in that evaluation to receive the CEU. A reminder, if you are looking to get that CEU, you need to stay for the entirety of the webinar. I know many people have been coming regularly to the psychoeducation webinars, but for anybody new, a brief overview of NAMI Greater Cleveland. At NAMI, we serve Cuyahoga County, and our mission is dedicated to empowering those living with mental illness, and then also family members and loved ones who are supporting those in their life with mental illness to achieve a better quality of life by providing education, support, information, and referral and advocacy. So we have support groups, educational courses for people living with mental illness, as well as for family members and caregivers. And you can check out all of our programs on our website. I'm going to add the link to our website and our helpline in the chat. We also have that helpline that's staffed currently Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that is staffed with trained staff volunteers and interns who provide assistance with helping connect to resources, both related to mental health and other community resources. So if you are looking for resources or ways to get connected more, please reach out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful presenter, Madeline, for our webinar today.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Cassie. It's nice to see all your faces and all your names for those who are off screen. My name is Maddie. I've done a few of these presentations for NAMI Greater Cleveland before. It never gets less daunting, so forgive me if I am a little shaky getting into this morning. You're my second people of the day, and there are so many of you. So I am going to get started without further ado. So today we're talking about mental health of LGBT, specifically for parents and caregivers. This is a topic that I love talking about as a therapist. I work with this population pretty frequently, whether it's LGBTQ adults who are raising kids or who are thinking about raising kids, whether it's parents of queer people and their journey to figuring out how to support their kids. But this is just in general one of my favorite topics, and it's Pride Month, so couldn't be more on the nose. Today, we're going to touch on a few different aspects of working with this population. Hopefully, these are things that you can take to your practice as well. So first things first, we're going to talk about prevalence. Probably many of us have heard the statistic or the fact that certain mental health conditions are more prevalent among this population. So we'll talk about, is that true? If so, why? What makes these youth more vulnerable to mental health conditions? Because I'm a social worker and this is just how my brain works, we'll get into the biopsychosocial perspective. We'll talk a little bit about age and stage of development, how that affects both risk and resiliency factors. We'll be talking about current events, this particular political moment and how that can impact LGBTQ youth, which I'm sure is on everyone's minds as well. And then lastly, I never want to end on a note of despair. So we will also be talking about strategies for parents, caregivers, and for those of us that work with them. How can we support the youth in our lives who might be queer? What resources are there for youth and families, and how do we access them? You may also be wondering, who is this lady who's talking to me? I used to have a picture here, but it looks like it's not loading. Like I said, my name is Maddie. My pronouns are she, her. I am a therapist in solo private practice. I opened my practice last year, but I've been a social worker for this will be year 8, I believe. I went to CASE. Shout out to my fellow CASE alums. I am bisexual. I am a cisgender woman. I'm also a mom. That's new since the last time I gave this presentation. So I'm really excited to be here, like I said, during Pride Month, talking about parenting and queerness, my 2 favorite things. So first things first, we're going to take a bird's eye view at this problem. What exactly is going on? Why are so many queer youth dealing with mental health conditions? Would be awesome if my images would load. Well, this was supposed to be an image of the LGBTQ IAAP acronym, but it's not. In short, this was going to be a summary of some of the language that you're going to hear me use today. I wish it would load because this is language that I'm very comfortable with, but if you are someone who chose to come to this presentation, you might not be. Hopefully it will be fixed when you can access the slides later, but in short, there are a lot of letters in the LGBTQ plus acronym these days. I have not been a social worker terribly long, and I still remember when we added the Q plus. For folks that are just coming to this information for the first time, it can be kind of overwhelming to think about the language of it all, the vocabulary. How do I talk to people in a way that both conveys what I want them to understand and is respectful of their experiences? I know for me, sometimes when I meet with my Gen Z or Gen Alpha clients, I walk away feeling like I don't know the language. And for that reason, one point that you'll hear me emphasize a lot throughout this presentation is the importance of having a learner's mind, like keeping your mind open to taking in new information, new perspectives. And for the sake of our group understanding today, I will, since I don't have this visual aid, probably refer to most of the people in this presentation either as queer youth or as trans or gender nonconforming youth when I'm talking about folks that are exploring gender identity specifically rather than sexual orientation. And that said, some of the folks in the room might be hearing me say queer youth and taking a little pause at that. It, again, was not that long ago that this word was used in a way that is hurtful towards the LGBTQ community. And in fact, it still is. This was not a very nice word for a lot of years. That said, in the LGBT community, many people have taken this term and reclaimed it and have said, this is not something that you can use against me. This is a way that I choose to talk about myself. I am queer, I am different than what the norm may be. That is something that is beautiful, that is something that is positive. You can't use something that I love about myself to hurt me. And there are a lot of really interesting perspectives out there about how and why and what it means for people to reclaim the word queer. That's not the main focus of what we're talking about today, but if that's something that interests you, I am happy to direct you in that direction. But I wanted to take a moment at the top and kind of explain my choice of language, because I know when I'm immersed in it all day, every day, I don't always recognize that that can be a little jarring for folks. So, state of the union here. You might be wondering just how prevalent is queerness in Ohio? Just how many people are there? How many people are we seeing in our practices? Well, according to data from 2019, which is admittedly a little bit old, there are about 389,000 adults and 72,000 youth who identify as LGBTQ. That might not sound like a lot, but breaking down that data and comparing it to the other states, Ohio actually has one of the densest populations of LGBTQ people in the United States. And we're a fairly populous state. So that is a pretty interesting thing. I can tell you from my clinical experience that my caseload is like 80% LGBT people at this point. I'm lucky that they keep finding me, that I put myself out there, and word of mouth seems to have done a great job in this case. But I know that my experience of seeing mostly queer people is not everyone's. You may be thinking, where on earth are all these clients? I would like to see them. Again, that gets into issues of access to care, which we will talk about. Another interesting piece of information from Equality Ohio, 30% of LGBT adults in Ohio over the age of 25 are raising families. So again, that's not a small number. And that also goes to show that parents are not necessarily a mom and a dad or heterosexual, that families, especially in Ohio, can look a lot of different ways. And that this conversation about how can I support the mental health of my LGBT child is happening in pretty diverse households as well. So let's get into it. What about mental health? So when we look at the most recent data, queer youth tend to be more likely than their heterosexual or cisgender peers to experience mental health problems. For LGB youth, meaning youth who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, they are more than twice as likely to report persistent sadness or hopelessness, which are two of the key symptoms of depression. And for transgender youth, they are twice as likely to experience depressive symptoms, suicidality, or to attempt suicide. So looking at just these two pieces of data, that's a pretty stark difference, more than twice as likely for both of these groups to have some kind of mental health symptomology. When I think about the youth that I've worked with, I think about how when I work with them, the factors that contribute to their depression or their anxiety or just the adjustment that all adolescents are going through that's developmentally appropriate is still really difficult. But when I look at LGBT youth, they are facing stressors that are different than their heterosexual cisgender peers. Furthermore, there are a few interesting studies that have come out in recent years about trans and gender nonconforming youth, TGNC is what you'll see the acronym as, in medical settings and their mental health. So just an interesting tidbit, ADD diagnosis, it can range from 3 to 7 times higher among trans and gender nonconforming youth than their cis peers. And depression is diagnosed at a 4 to 7 times higher rate among this population as well. This study was, it pulled data from multiple health systems across the United States and looked at youth in gender affirming care between the ages of 3 and 17. So obviously not everyone here was diagnosed with or was screened for ADD or depression, but still interesting that we saw higher rates of diagnosis of both of these conditions across settings, across hospital locations, geographically, across this vast age and developmental range of 3 to 17, across different types of prescribers or different types of providers. All of this goes to say that when we are regularly screening for mental health conditions among LGBT youth, we tend to find them more often. Last year, the Trevor Project, which is an organization that provides mental health support for LGBT youth, released a report about the state of mental health for LGBT youth in Ohio. They did this for all 50 states, and they found some pretty interesting results. So 43% of LGBT youth in our state considered suicide in the previous year. When we looked at trans youth specifically, that number went up to 50%. %68 of LGBT youth experienced symptoms of anxiety in 2023. And when we look at transgender youth in particular, that number went up to 73%. And 56% of LGBT youth in Ohio experienced symptoms of depression in the prior year, including 61% of transgender youth. So the takeaway here is that there are marked increases in mental health symptom presentation among LGBT youth, and in particular among transgender youth. And if your brain works like mine, you're probably sitting there letting the wheels start to turn about why is that? What might be going on that rapidly increases the experiences of depression, anxiety, suicidality among this population? And what's different between cis LGBT folks and transgender youth in this case? The answer is a lot of biopsychosocial factors are different. In particular, we'll focus mostly on the psycho and the social, not so much on the bio, but there is some interesting stuff there as well. So the risk factors look different depending on the youth and depending on their resiliency and their support system. So for one, the research shows that coming out at a younger age or an earlier developmental stage is associated with poor mental health outcomes, or I might frame it as a more difficult coming out process, a more difficult adjustment. Anybody who has met a teenager, let alone worked with them, knows that it is not an easy stage of life. That said, it is developmentally appropriate for teens to be exploring their identities in one way or another. Coming out at a much younger age, say in middle or elementary school, when kids are at an earlier stage of development, when their peers may not be able to understand or support or engage socially in affirming ways or in age-appropriate ways, can really negatively impact the youth, can lead to things like social isolation, bullying, school rejection. The school climate also factors into this a lot. I know that a lot of schools nowadays are talking about their LGBT youth and how do we treat them in schools, for better or for worse. That seems to be a topic of conversation that we are having often. And what the research says about this is that a school climate that is more accepting tends to have LGBT youth who are students who have better mental health. They are having more resiliency. They have lower rates of depression. They attend school more often. They are more social with their peers in pro-social ways. That said, the inverse is also true, and this is broken down in last year's report from the Trevor Project. If the school climate is less accepting, if it is a social norm to bully or to have in-group, out-group dynamics, if teachers and staff are not aware of or are dealing with their own difficulties with how to support LGBT youth, then this can be passed on to the social dynamic and can lead to that ostracization that negatively impacts mental health. But it's not just at school. Your family support is a pretty major factor. Family acceptance is an area that a lot has been written about when it comes to LGBT mental health, especially among youth. So whether or not your family supports you or rejects you, whether they have the resources to be able to provide you with support, whether it's mental health support, medical support, or even just being housed or unhoused. If you are housing insecure or homeless, you are more likely to have worsened mental health outcomes. This is also true among LGBT youth as well. Trauma has a pretty big impact on this population as well. Folks that face family or community violence, either identity related or not, those who experience bullying or harassment in schools or in their communities, experiencing trauma can lead to worsened mental health outcomes for LGBT youth. One thing that we know about trauma is that it really affects the way that you see the world, the way that you see yourself, the way that you engage with others, whether or not you feel like you are safe. And so all of these things impact your ability to be resilient, your ability to overcome hardship. We know that it's not easy to be a teenager. It's not easy to be LGBT. Now, if we add in all of these other factors that we've just talked about, coming out at a younger age, a school climate that's a little iffy in whether or not it's supportive, family that aren't supportive, housing insecurity, trauma, all of these things can make it so that people have a hard time coping with the symptoms of mental health that come up. Some of the things that might happen as a result of this would be substance use, which tends to be higher in lesbian, gay, or bisexual high schoolers, according to the research. Also, lack of access to healthcare. Folks might be skipping their doctor's appointments. They might not be getting screened for these mental health outcomes. They might not be consistent with treatment. This might be due to a resource problem, like I don't have a ride or I don't have health insurance. It might also be an avoidance strategy. I don't feel like I'm worth it. I don't want to talk about what's been going on. I don't want to take care of myself. Or it makes me feel so anxious to have to talk about it that I'd rather just not go and deal with it myself. A report from the Williams Institute looking at social and cultural influences on this population found a few main impacts or a few main psychosocial stressors that have an impact. Top to bottom, they would be bullying, harassment, family rejection, overrepresentation in the juvenile justice system, and violence at the family or community level. All of these factors are not specific to LGBT youth alone, but when we factor in the different considerations like identity-based bullying or discrimination at school or at work, or family rejection that leads to homelessness. These social and cultural influences can have a specific impact as well. One example of this might be if there is a youth who is rejected by their family for being transgender and they are seeking shelter services. They may not be allowed to go to a shelter for adults if they're under 18. They may not be allowed to go to a shelter that is for their correct gender. They might be sent to a shelter for their gender assigned at birth. All of these micro experiences of rejection, of discrimination based on their gender identity are now compounding with these more meso or macro problems of being unhoused, having resource issues. And all of these things impact their mental health as well. This is not just somebody who is figuring out their identity and struggling with that. This is also somebody who lacks family support, who doesn't have a roof over their head, and who is really having to flex those self-advocacy muscles just to do their everyday life. Sometimes when I meet with clients in situations that are impacted in these pretty specific ways, I say things like, yeah, of course you're depressed. I would be too. I think anyone would be. We have some systemic problems here that we're not going to fix with a coping skill. I think we should start there and see what we can do before I give you something like deep breathing or reading a book, watching a TED Talk. I think that when we work with this population, our training as therapists, as social workers, has to take into account these systemic factors before we can do any of that, I guess, micro level work. So one framework that we use to understand this population is Elon Meyer's minority stress model. You may be familiar with this from the research as well. This is a framework for understanding the impact of stigma, prejudice, and discrimination against LGBT people. So Meyer published his work maybe like 20 years ago for the first time, maybe longer. And at that time, minority stress theory really focused on lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. It did not include transgender or gender non-binary, gender non-conforming folks. That said, what the basic theory said was that stigma, prejudice, and discrimination can impact the environment and can cause or worsen existing mental health problems for that population. And in this model, he broke it down in a few different main factors that he was looking at, including discrimination, oppression, aggression, which we can think of as violence or trauma in some cases, internalized homonegativity, which in 2025, we just call it homophobia, negative self-beliefs, and ability to cope with stress or resilience. So bear those in mind. In recent years, researchers have adapted this model to include trans and gender nonconforming people and their unique experiences as well. So when we think about discrimination, oppression, aggression, internalized homophobia or transphobia, now some of these factors are a little more specific and damaging in different ways for trans and gender nonconforming people. For one, they may have difficulty obtaining healthcare services in a way that their cis peers do not. Some providers simply may not work with trans people, and under our current state laws and national laws, that is allowed. Some folks might be well-meaning about this too. They might say, I was not trained enough to know how to care for this population. It can be well-meaning and it can still be damaging for somebody to reach out and say, I need healthcare, and for that person to say, you can't get it here. Trans and gender nonconforming people also have a concern for their physical safety that may be different than cisgender people. There are a number of trans people that are injured or even murdered in Ohio every year. If you are interested in the legality of things like the trans panic defense, Equality Ohio has a really fantastic breakdown of this really terrible thing. But that concern for physical safety, especially in our current political climate, is a factor that trans and gender nonconforming kids have to think about that cis queer kids maybe don't. Lack of mental health support. There are a lot of providers on the mental health side who also are not comfortable working with trans and non-binary youth. Again, part of this is due to our legal system. There was a law passed last year, HB 68, that made it really difficult for trans and non-binary youth in Ohio to access mental health care. It put constraints on providers and how they are able to do treatment. The language of the bill was also intended a little bit as a scare tactic to make providers think that they would be in trouble for doing this and to make youth feel like they do not have anyone that they can reach out to. This bill had pretty wide-reaching results. And again, if this is something that you're concerned about, NASW Ohio has a really fantastic training of how to remain in compliance while still doing the care that you have always been doing. But for people who don't have great legal literacy, myself included, it can be really scary to hear people in the media and in our legal system talking about whether or not you can go to therapy or go to the doctor. Lastly, I don't want to discount the impact of community stigma and internalized transphobia as well. Community stigma would include things like, is it accepted if I fly a trans flag on my front porch? What will my neighbors think if they know that I went to Pride? Am I safe to walk down the street as a trans kid just going to the park to meet my friends? And internalized transphobia would include things like, am I valid in my identity? Am I allowed to want the things that I want or to like the things that I like? Am I really the gender that I say I am, or am I just pretending? So again, I never want to end on a despairing note, even though things are pretty intense in Ohio nowadays. Normally in these presentations, I include a stat from the ACLU about how many bills targeting the LGBT community are there in the US and in Ohio right now as of the date of this presentation. I didn't do that this time, partly because it's being updated so quickly that it is hard to keep an accurate count. That said, I think it would be probably more useful to spend the rest of the time that we have together talking about, okay, we know what the problem is, now what do we do? At least that's what I think might be useful. So in general, when we work with parents of LGBT youth, there are a few things that we keep in mind. If these parents come in and they're saying, my kid has been saying things lately about their gender or about their sexuality or about questioning these things, what on earth do I do? There are a handful of things that we would keep in mind. Number one would be to follow your child's lead. This is sometimes the hardest part. I know that so much of parenting is trying to anticipate what the next thing is going to be. If I can clown on myself a little bit for a minute, I have an almost 1-year-old. I'm constantly thinking about what thing I need to baby proof next. For parents of high schoolers, they might be thinking about college or driver's ed or next semester even. What are they going to be taking for classes? Do they need tutoring? Do they need new shin guards? Do they need a ride to and from play practice? It's so hard to not be able to anticipate what comes next. And when it comes to exploring their identities as queer or gender nonconforming youth, we can't predict what's going to come next. There's also this fear I find sometimes with parents that by following my child's lead, am I giving them an amount of independence that is age appropriate? Or am I letting the kid run the show? And again, I wouldn't go home and ask my 1-year-old, what do you want for dinner tonight? Partly because she can't talk, and partly because it's my job to provide the food and it's her job to eat it and feed herself. Same thing goes here. If your child is coming to you with questions, with curiosities, with a desire to explore, you can follow their lead in ways that are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate and still affirming. It's kind of my second bullet point. Part of this also comes down to educating yourself. Another thing about parenting that is really challenging is that a lot of it has to start with you. A lot of being a good parent is working through your stuff so that you can show up for the kid that you got. Part of this for parents of queer youth might mean familiarizing yourself with things like vocabulary, language. Just what on earth does this acronym mean? What resources are there at my kid's school or in our neighborhood, in Cleveland in general? Can also offer choices. Again, these can be age appropriate. It doesn't have to mean that your 12-year-old is suddenly calling the shots in your household, but it can mean that you let them be the one picking out what school supplies they're getting. If they want all girl colors, then they can get all girl colors. If they want specifically clothes from the boys section, then we go to the boys section. And we might, in a therapy setting, notice what is coming up for you as the parent when you are offering these choices and letting them make them. Is there discomfort? Is there curiosity? Is there skepticism? We don't have to judge it. We can notice it and pay attention to what that might be telling us. Accessing support, which can look a lot of different ways. We'll talk about resources for parents, youth, and families all together as well. But in general, it is very important that you have your village around you, that you are not going this alone. There are absolutely other people who have been in your shoes, and we don't want you to feel like you have to figure it all out by yourself. And lastly, it's important to take care of yourself too. It's not just all about educating yourself and parenting so dang hard every single day. We already know that you're doing that. You have to be well while you do it too, or if not well, then at least trying to take care of yourself. So according to healthychildren.org, there is an awareness of the physical differences in gender development as early as around 2. Every time I say this, there are folks who are kind of like bug eyes, like very surprised. Part of this is how we as adults talk to and about kids. Like they are smart little pattern absorbers. They're just like watching us from the second they're born, like taking it all in. And so they are aware of the physical differences between what their body looks like and what mommy and daddy's bodies look like and what maybe their siblings' bodies look like pretty early. Kids can label themselves as boys or girls around 3 years old, sometimes younger. Kids tend to, around this time, be figuring out, like, how do I talk about myself in a way? And that might be time where they are comparing themselves to their peers and saying, that's a boy, I'm a girl, or you're a girl and I'm a boy, or we're both girls. And again, this is all about pattern recognition for them. It might be a little bit uh, jarring to notice that your kid is doing this pattern recognition and identifying differently than you thought that they were. This does not need to be cause for panic. Sometimes it can just be that they are figuring out the pattern. They could be exploring or trying on different identities. It might mean something, it might not mean anything. It is okay to go along with what they are saying about their gender when they are 3, 4 years old, and for that to not be a lifetime commitment. It can be something that you are paying attention to, that you are curious about, and that you are welcoming of. Sometimes I think about when I work with adults who are exploring their sexuality or gender identity in their 30s or 40s or 50s, how wonderful would it have been for all of us to have had this opportunity to like really explore and try on different identities when we were younger, or for those who have had that opportunity, like how was that for them? I have to wonder. I imagine that it might bring a greater sense of knowing yourself and what you like and you don't like and what fits and what doesn't fit in your 30s, 40s, and beyond if you are given more of this curiosity approach when you were younger. And this is an image that's not there anymore. So development also impacts the coming out process or the identity exploration process even. The image that is not visible on the previous screen was Erik Erikson's stages of development. I will break it down a little bit as best I can, but many of us are probably familiar with Erik Erikson. In early childhood, the stage that kids are in from around 3 to around 7 is initiative versus guilt. Erikson said that in each developmental stage, there was a conflict that we had to figure out, that we had to resolve. So initiative versus guilt is all about taking the lead, taking ownership and trying new things. And doing so leads to either a sense of initiative and self-efficacy, like I can do this. Not doing so leads to guilt or embarrassment, like I should have done this and I didn't. So for kids that are exploring their identities in this early childhood stage, developmentally, they might need comfort. They might need you to be that strong base to say, it is okay for you to try new things, for you to try on different costumes at dress up, or for you to ask me to call you a different name for a day. Again, it doesn't have to be a lifetime commitment. My friend's son really likes to go by Fred. His name is not Fred. He just thinks it's funny. I don't know why he thinks it's the funniest name in the world, but again, we'll entertain it. Kids at this age are really developing a sense of confidence and reassurance as they take risks. And again, that is the developmental stage or conflict that you're helping them through. Another thing that kids at this age often need to hear is that they are loved unconditionally, that there's nothing wrong with them. They might be developing their identity in ways that are different than their peers. They might like things that are different than peers of the same gender. And that's okay. That's not bad. That's not a negative thing. It just is. Later on in middle childhood, so now like 7 to 12, Erikson's Erickson lays out the stage of industry versus inferiority. This is where kids are continuing to develop that competence, that self-efficacy, and that confidence. And in this stage, they really need support in cultivating a positive self-esteem. So this can look like as kids are exploring their identity and exploring skill building and exploring what their interests are in this middle childhood age, they really need their parents and caregivers to take an interest in the things that they're interested in. So again, you may not be the most passionate about robotics club. It may be something that your kid loves. I'm not saying that you have to read 200 books about robotics. I am saying that kids notice when we talk to them with delight, when we are genuinely curious and interested and inspired. And again, if there is an element of identity exploration going on at this stage, whether their interests are typical for their sex assigned at birth or not, or with their peer group, they really need that curiosity and that delight from their parents. And lastly, this is where we see the most identity development taking place is adolescence, where the core conflict is identity versus role confusion. And again, I tell parents all the time of adolescents that seeking a sense of self outside of their family of origin is normal, is developmentally appropriate. Rebellion is frustrating. It is also sometimes a safety risk. It is often not wise, but in terms of appropriateness, it is right on the money. During this stage, many people are trying on different identities and trying to figure out where they fit in. And they might need support from their parents in doing so. They might want to try something out and never go to it again. They might, for a while, be questioning, do I like boys? Do I like girls? Do I like anyone? Do I like everyone? And again, what they need from their parents is understanding, curiosity, a willingness to sit in the not knowing. We may not have answers to this. And what is that like for you? So there are some resources that might be helpful to you or the parents that you work with on this journey of exploring identity or supporting your youth in doing so. There is a website called the Kidlit Mama. I included a link to her book list here. She breaks down different children's books by what topic area they focus on and also what age or stage they are most appropriate for. You can't see them because, of course, you can't, but the two books that I was gonna show you on here are two of my daughter's favorites. One is Pink is for Boys, which is a book about how anybody can have anything as their favorite color. And Love Makes a Family, which is a book about the things that are intrinsic to all families, like, again, that unconditional love and support, things you could see in any household, regardless of who the adult caregivers are, like making a special breakfast or jumping in puddles. And again, these are developmentally appropriate, but they are focusing on these areas that really intersect with identity exploration. There are a couple books that are also really great for adolescents. You can't see them on here, but you will. They are Middletown by Sarah Moon, which is a book about a queer youth in the foster system, and Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender, which is about a BIPOC trans boy and his friends kind of figuring out high school and first love together. I recommend these to my teen clients pretty often as something to think about and talk about with me or with their parents. They are YA books, but again, if you are a parent and you're writing these down to share with your kids, would totally recommend taking a flip through just to make sure that you know what you're in for, because YA books can sometimes handle some heavy stuff. So those conversations that you might be having about these books with your kids, they can look a lot of different ways. If you're reading it with them, you might ask something like, what did the book make you feel? Did anything make you laugh about that chapter? I thought that blank was really interesting. What do you think? Or you can dip your toe into trying to share in their experience. I remember feeling like blank when I was a teenager. How did you feel? Sometimes these books are a way for us to see little bits of ourselves as well. That I know that a lot of times parents of queer youth feel like they struggle to relate to what their kids are going through because it's so different than what their adolescence was like. And I find that books can be, and pieces of media in general, can be a really useful way to find those common pieces, those touchstones together. Lastly, I will always and forever recommend PFLAG. This is a group for parents. It is called PFLAG because it stands for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It is not exclusive to parents and friends of those groups. That's just what it was called when it was founded 30 years ago. Their literature recommends that you lead with love, listen with intention, show subtle support through things like what media you're sharing, and learn the terms, so educate yourself. And again, you are not alone if you are a parent of a queer youth. There are 8 million LGBT Americans and 1.4 million TGNC, transgender nonconforming Americans. And all of those people had parents or still have them if they're lucky. Your feelings about this journey are valid. It is a hard one. This is the hardest job you'll ever do, parenting. And you are important too on this journey. Whatever is coming up for you deserves support. It's just a matter of finding the right place to get it. So there are a few places that you can look locally and otherwise. Like I said, PFLAG, the Cleveland chapter, has been active since 1985, which is pretty awesome. That's 40 years. I can't do math, but that's incredible. There are also a few different books and websites that I would recommend. The Trevor Project, I plugged them earlier. Rebecca Miner is an LCSW from New York, and they have a book and a website called Gender Specialist with a ton of guidance for parents. There's also the book, This is a Book for Parents of Gay Kids by Kristen Russo and Dan Owens-Reed. It's a little bit older now, maybe 10 or 11 years old, but still a goodie in my opinion. Local to Cleveland, there's the PFLAG group for parents. They have a monthly group through the LGBT Center. For youth, there are programs through QU, ages 11 to 19. They have, I believe, weekly drop-in hours as well as stuff on Zoom. They also have a discussion group that happens periodically throughout the year. And Colors Plus Youth Center, they have programs for youth and families running pretty continuously throughout the year. So would highly recommend checking them out as well. Lastly, if there's one thing you take away from today, it is that family support of LGBT youth is linked with improved mental health outcomes. This is true across studies, across geographic locations in the US. By and large, the one thing that I want you to take away is that supporting and loving your kids or helping your clients to do that is the most important thing that you can do for their mental health. And it is also linked to lower risk of suicide as well as positive mental health outcomes. So not to hit that too hard, but both are important. All right. I talked your ears off. Thank you all for being such a great audience. Should we check and see if there